This meeting is being broadcast on the key digital resources, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please, Mr. Miroshnik. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a while since we last talked. So the information you're about to see and hear has been gathered by our colleagues and ourselves. Today we're presenting a report on the violations of certain norms and principles of humanitarian legislation perpetrated by the armed groups of the Kiev regime since January the 1st to 31st of March 2025. This data has been collected in cooperation with law enforcement agencies and local administrations of the regions in the zone of hostilities. This data has been verified in a series of my trips to the liberated territories of Kursk region, in border regions of the Belgorod region, Donetsk People's Republic, and Lugansk People's Republic. Our conclusions are based on testimonies of victims of Ukrainian Nazis. We have all reasons to believe that the crimes committed by Ukrainian armed groups against peaceful civilians are the result of a coordinated policy of the Kiev regime aimed at organizing systemic large-scale hostilities against civilians. The criminal strategy of the Zelensky regime looks to be aimed at destabilizing the political situation in the Russian Federation and sowing fear among civilians. They blatantly explain their terrorist methods and techniques versus civilian population and killing innocent civilian people. This approach is realized via direct orders to armed forces of Ukraine, I quote, to shoot all civilians you come across. Over this time, the armed forces of Ukraine fired at least 22,221 items of ordnance, a total of 251,865 shots of different calibers and modifications. The number of casualties among peaceful population is directly related to the policy of Zelensky and their response to international developments. This only goes to emphasize the deliberate nature of crimes perpetrated by the Zelensky regime against civilians. In the last weeks of March, Kiev responded to the beginning of a negotiations process between Moscow and Washington with increased artillery shellings, with up to 2,000 artillery shell explosions in a week, sharp increase in comparison with February. The most explosions registered in Donetsk, Kherson region, Kursk and Zaporozhye region. Since January the 1st to the 31st of March, the armed forces of Ukraine, according to data verified by us, hurt at least 1,100 civilians, 292 peaceful civilians died. Over the same period, Ukrainian guerrilla fighters killed five children. Since the beginning of the special military operation, at least 21,000 civilians were affected by the armed forces of Ukraine, with 14,300 of them wounded and injured. 6,717 people were killed. After March the 18th, the date of the phone conversation between Presidents Putin and Trump, the number of people affected by AFU fire increased drastically. More than 150 civilians a week have been injured and wounded. The biggest number of civilians affected is registered in the Donetsk People's Republic. 492 in 29 civilians were hurt, including 30 minors. 70 people were killed in the Kursk region. $375 people were affected. 206 of them were injured, nine children. 115 people were killed. In the Belgorod region, 169 people were hurt, including 8 minors. 21 people were killed. In the Lugansk People's Republic, where hostilities continue in the northwest of the region, 17 civilians were killed. The statistical data does not yet include information on executed and tortured people of Kursk region. Now that this region has been completely liberated from its Ukrainian occupation, investigations will continue. A whole number of villages, such as Plokhovo, Buyevo in Kursk region, only half of civilians who hadn't evacuated lived to see these regions liberated. The investigation committee of the Russian Federation is already collecting testimony from people who witnessed the occupation. There are graves in orchards and gardens, as well as nameless graves. These investigations will be brought to an end, and the world will get real data on the atrocities perpetrated by the Kiev regime in the Kursk region. Preliminary data already indicates that civilians tortured, maimed, and executed by the Ukrainian regime civilians in a whole number of villages in the Kursk region. Ukrainian prisoners of war have already testified that they had been ordered by their superiors to execute all civilians they come across and to execute by shooting anyone who arouses suspicion. That's yet another indication of a grave military crime that has no expiration date. Over 800 civilians have been evacuated. A lot of them have already testified about the occupation regime established on the territories, about executions, pillages, rapes and violence in the territory. 4 POW exchanges have taken part so far. The biggest group of reclaimed services are working with military psychologists and investigators. Their testimony indicates that the existence of a whole network of secret prisons along the front line and in prisons in Kharkov, Kiev, Kryvyi Rog, and other Ukrainian cities and towns. This network can be called a territory of uncontrolled violence, torturing, extortion of testimony, used in the interests of Ukrainian special services, for blackmailing, and extorting money from families of the victims. This is covered by a separate report, and these crimes continue. There has been no discernible reaction from the international community. This policy on the part of responsible international organizations is unacceptable, especially those who talk so often about sticking to the norms and rules of international legislation. They keep talking about the inadmissibility of tortures and violence. Over the last 3 months, the armed forces of Ukraine continued pounding places of mass visitations of civilians, targeting retail malls and areas where people spent their weekends. They targeted zones where there was no indication of military presence. Ukrainian armed groups on Christmas delivered a number of airstrikes and artillery strikes against civilians. On the 10th of January, the Ukrainian armed forces executed a HIMARS strike against a retail center in the downtown of Donetsk. 2 employees were hurt, and lots of houses and social venues around the retail center were damaged. The next day, on the 11th of January, a long-range Storm Shadow missile basically demolished the administration center in Nowe Yurkovichi, hurting 3 people. No military object was affected because there are none of them there. The next day, 11 civilians were injured by NATO caliber artillery shells that hurt a local school. On Saturday, the 8th of February, there was a multiple launch rocket strike in Makeyevka. The attack killed 2 women and 9 people were hurt, including a 7-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. Not a single military object was affected. Over the last 3 months, the armed forces of Ukraine only increased the use of drones to target civilians, including underage children.
409 civilians suffered as a result of drone strikes, including those who died, including children. 24 underage people were injured. Plane-type UAVs were used against civilian installations located at a large distance from the contact line. On the 8th of March, 337 drones were used to conduct strikes against civilian objects. This led to damage to civilian infrastructure, including apartment buildings and civilian enterprises. Quadcopters and FPV drones were used to make targeted strikes against civilians and civilian objects. The Ukrainian criminals essentially hunted civilians and civilian vehicles, including buses in various districts of the Belgorod region. bus number 2 in Golovka was attacked at least 3 times during this period, and each time this led to civilian casualties. On the 4th of February, a school bus was attacked in Vasilyevka, Zaporozhye region. 5 children were injured, aged 5 to 8. Another kind of a practice that is widespread with the Ukrainian army is daily attacks against civilian vehicles on Kursk region, Donetsk and Lugansk republics roads. There is no doubt that Ukrainian militants sending kamikaze drones against civilian cars are well aware that they are making strikes against civilian people. But these cars sometimes drive women and children, sometimes entire families. International humanitarian law protecting medical services from attacks are ignored by the Ukrainian army. In the last 2 months, dozens of emergency vehicles and ambulance vehicles were attacked by Ukrainian drones. 12 medical personnel were injured and 2 died as a result of such attacks. Other emergency services are also targeted. A common practice is making repeat strikes when emergency services have arrived. 17 emergency workers were injured and some of them died as a result of such strikes in the recent period. 30 members of utilities and other municipal services were injured or killed. This is a common practice that aggravates the crimes of the Ukrainian militants who minimize the chances of civilians to receive aid in the wake of their strikes. This is a testament to the lack of any moral norms on their behalf. With a total lack of trust between parties in the conflict, they have essentially undermined the agreement reached with the mediation of the United States to impose a moratorium on strikes against energy infrastructure. During this period, they made 144 such strikes against infrastructure in the Russian Federation. They have not changed their practice to attack civilian infrastructure, and they made several very visible strikes against civilian infrastructure facilities that have been a clear illustration of the intentions of Kiev with regard to any restrictions on hostilities to be imposed. The Suja gas metering station was hit. Over 150 electric power supply elements were damaged, including those that supplied power to 63,000 people. And in Vinogradovo, facilities were damaged which supplied electricity to 56,000 people. In total, this led to outages for over 200,000 people. In the first quarter of this year, another horrible statistic was the crimes perpetrated by the Kiev regime to conceal their crimes and their targeting of war correspondents, journalists who carry out their duties along the contact line. 13 members of the journalist profession were injured as a result of those strikes, and 6 of them have died. This is more than in the previous year. In Mikhailovka, Lugansk People's Republic, a Hamas strike targeted a journalist group. This shows the fear of the Kiev regime, the fear that they feel when they realize that the truth about their activities may come out. This is the source of their aggression against Russian journalists. Considering the fact that the Ukrainian army carries out most of their criminal activities in the Russian territories, such as the Kursk region, the Russian investigative authorities are currently pursuing criminal cases against Ukrainian militants. Until the end of March, 422 criminal cases have been initiated. During the same period, 41 criminal cases have been completed, and the investigative materials have been sent to the prosecutor. Russian courts have already issued convictions in 397 cases against Ukrainian militants, both the Ukrainian army members and the foreign mercenaries. Another fact that characterizes the criminal activities of the Kiev regime against the civilian population and disrespect for international humanitarian law is the following. Ukrainian militants have received instructions to violate and ignore these norms from the Ukrainian leadership, and their patrons and their sponsors do not dispute such instructions. The co-organizers and supporters of the Kiev regime block any attempts to conduct international investigations of their crimes, and this is something that we have noted on many international platforms. Kiev often practices false flag scenarios, killing their own people and attributing these criminal activities to Russian troops for international media. We note that the attempts to find a peaceful settlement are ignored, and the danger of similar provocations by the Kiev regime is only increasing. Kiev will not stop at killing and injuring its own civilians for similar purposes. Now, I have laid out key points of our report on the first quarter of 2025. I believe it will be published on the Foreign Ministry websites, and it will be available in print and electronic form in English and Russian. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miroshnik. The report will indeed be soon published at the Foreign Ministry website and on its social media platforms. Now, let's proceed to the questions and answers. Ukraina.ru and RT. Yes, thank you. This is very important for our subscribers. The question is the following. Is there a probability that the Russian justice system will organize a judicial process similar to the Nuremberg trials that will be highly visible and will create a highly beneficial effect in terms of propaganda, spreading the message to Western audiences? Well, this is a very relevant question. The need to prosecute crimes dealing with violation of humanitarian law is very important, but let us remember the historical practice and to see what's happening today. The decision to conduct the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War were made after the Nazi regime was defeated. It's a political decision with regard to where it will be held and based on what legal instruments. I have already mentioned that the Russian law enforcement and judicial system are already carrying out their work. Of course, only a small part of crimes have been prosecuted, but about 50 militants have already received convictions. 8.5 years to life in prison. The main investigative directorate of the military and the investigative committee of Russia currently prosecuting militants based on their crimes in the Kursk region, in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. And every time we advance, every time our troops advance in those territories, they uncover new signs of crimes. And of course, the investigation must do its job, and this will be a basis for further judicial decisions. Further tribunals are inevitable, but we need to make sure that the special military operation is brought to its completion, and the victims of those crimes must certainly see their perpetrators receive due punishment. Now we are making the requisite lists of the criminals and their crimes, and we intended to make this information available to countries who want to hear. We are demonstrating all the facts, just like we're doing today with you. We are presenting special reports, which are available to all the international organizations. We are providing all the evidence to organizations which honestly fulfill their duty. The actions that will be taken further will be the result of political goodwill. The punishment of criminals who have violated international humanitarian law is in the interest of everyone who want to prevent crimes from going unpunished. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, a question from Taria.
Do you receive information from the right bank of the Kherson River about the crimes committed by the militants and the authorities? Do you have any statistics on the number of such atrocities, and what are the most common complaints? Thank you for your question. I understand the geographical reference, because indeed, as a Kherson media, you are worried by the state of the territory that's still controlled by the Ukrainian militants. Of course, we get information from that site. We receive testimony from people who confirm directly the crimes and atrocities perpetrated, such as marauding, tortures, sexual rape, and a number of other crimes. This data has yet to be verified and confirmed, and then it will be included in our statistics and our data that we disclose, being fully confident in their authenticity. We're now waiting for verification, because unlike the Ukrainian side, we can't rely on Western organizations who inflate the data the way they want. Everything we present in our report is verified and confirmed data, and we are going to continue doing that, providing verified and confirmed data on the situation in Kherson region. We have photo and video proof that's currently being verified by law enforcement agencies, and we at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs rely on data provided by law enforcement officials. I'm sure that in the near future we'll have more data about what is happening there. And we're really concerned about that, considering the number of artillery shellings, the number of artillery shells and missiles being fired at your region. Thank you. Please, Moscow Post. Thank you. You already answered one of our questions in your speech, so we have two left. The matter of biological laboratories in Ukraine, is it discussed in the negotiations with the United States? All matters related to the dialogue between Moscow and Washington deal with key areas aimed at finding a mutually acceptable options for settlement. I think it would make sense for us to refrain from discussing gossip and rumors around this process, violations of international humanitarian law, including the use of biological methods of warfare and chemical methods of warfare. We have this information. It's been passed on to international organizations. And I'm sure that a whole number of international organizations, including American ones, have plenty of information on this regard. And when we come to the official discussion of this matter, we'll have more information on that. But we're committed to finding a solution to this problem and holding those accountable. So how many criminal investigations have been invoked regarding the atrocities with the Kiev regime in the Kursk region? I would like to expand on the technical side of the issue. Criminal investigation may relate to crimes perpetrated by dozens, if not hundreds, of militants. And geographically, they can cover more than just the territory of the Kursk region. As of now, the figures and numbers are in the report. From what we've been informed by the investigation committee of the Russian Federation, 41 criminal investigations have been invoked, but over 240 of them are related to firing at civilian venues and infrastructure. So these numbers are not indicative. The investigation process is just getting started in the Kursk region. It's currently being held back by mine diffusion, mine clearing. So a full-scale investigation has not yet gone full scale. As soon as we have sorted out the issues of security, there will be more data coming in. All our law enforcement and investigation authorities are committed to making public all the atrocities perpetrated over the 264 days it's been under control of Ukrainian armed groups. From the data we have, it's going to mean hundreds and hundreds of criminal investigations to be invoked soon. Thank you. Any more questions, colleagues? International Life magazine. The armed forces of Ukraine deliberately destroyed Cardinal Monastery in Donetsk. What do you think may trigger this? Well, you have touched upon a whole series of questions, and the burnt down Cardinal Monastery is just one piece in hundreds of facts of Orthodox structures being burnt down and damaged all across the battle line, all along the battle line, and crimes perpetrated against the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Now it shows that the desire of the Kiev regime to cut the local population from their Orthodox roots that are the very base of self-identification to those people. And this makes the Kiev regime go hysterical. I think it's the process of sowing hatred. And I think the Garnal monastery is just part of that issue. I think we will dedicate a special report on the damage inflicted upon Orthodox churches and temples. And we will try to outline the sheer scale of those atrocities, which is colossal. And this is a direct result of the regime, of the actions of the current regime. I think it's one of the topics that will require special international investigation. Torturing people and torturing them for their religious associations. Thank you, colleagues. There was an agreement about a truce with the United States of America, but at the same time, the Easter truce was broken with the help of American missiles. And as Putin said, American missiles are guided by Americans. The satellite imaging, satellite data, targeting data, and so on. Where it turns out that on the one hand, the US is negotiating a truce with us, and on the other hand, it's providing targeting and satellite tracking data to the Kiev regime, which they essentially created itself. When are we going to say openly that the war in Ukraine is being waged against the United States of America? First, nothing new has been said. We have said many times that the United States used to be a direct co-organizer of the crisis currently developing in Ukraine. Now we say just as openly that the new administration of the United States is trying to build a dialogue with Russia, trying to come up with options of peaceful resolution of the conflict. So there's no secret here, no secret mechanisms. And as for your point about American missiles being used, I don't have any information on the use of missiles programmed by the manufacturer. We have seen an increase in the use of HIMARS, multiple launch rocket system, used for delivering strikes against our media, representatives, against peaceful infrastructure. I think this is more of a sign that Ukraine is trying to use up all the weapons that could be blocked by the United States remotely. So now they're trying to fire off as much of that ordnance as possible, including HIMARS missiles, maybe some other missiles. Because according to our data, there's some key that can be used to deactivate those weapons remotely. Maybe those could be some NATO structures or some headquarters that have been mentioned in Western publications. The fact of using long-range French and British missiles have been noted and reflected in our reports. And the position of a number of European states is not peaceful. They're doing everything they can to demonstrate their reactionary position and to disrupt the very possibility of a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. But they're all masterminded by the United States of America, Europe and Ukraine, and the atrocities of the United States of America. Does it mean that your job doesn't include registering atrocities perpetrated by the United States? Because the United States have been involved in human trafficking, in biological weapons development, in inhuman tests on people, being involved in that personally. So what can explain such blindness of Russia's ruling class? I wouldn't welcome such street rhetorics. I wouldn't welcome statements not backed by clear arguments. At this conference, we've been providing you with verified data and numbers. So, while fully supporting your activities in this regard, we call upon you to use only confirmed and verified data in your arguments, thus making our position much more serious and grounded and justified. Because sometimes we often face a very reactionary position on the part of the number of states. We insist that all violations of international humanitarian law are backed by verified data, numbers, and figures, and it's there for any state that has the eyes and ears to hear what we are saying. So call upon you to use verified and proven information and data. Thank you. Colleagues? If there are no more questions, thank you for taking part in today's briefing, asking your questions. Maybe a couple words in conclusion. I'm very grateful for your time, for showing your interest in the topics we've been discussing. And I hope that the report we have presented today will be used in your news materials, and we will do everything we can. And our delegations, and we will do everything we can to provide you with state-of-the-art information on the atrocities of the Kiev regime. So thank you very much for being here and for supporting our cause.